The Lantern Keeper. Mournlight was a town grown from ancient trees and perpetual twilight. The veil hung low there, so low it brushed rooftops and licked at doorframes, soft as cloth and heavy as sorrow. Fog curled through every street, around every root and branch like remembering. The people who lived beneath had learned to see with their ears, to breathe with a deep patience, to trust the soft amber lights glowing in the window of their tree homes. Without those lights, an individual could forget their own shape in the mist. At Mournlight's centre stood the oldest tree of all. Its trunk was broad as a cottage, its bark thick as armour, its roots tangled like an elder's long wise fingers. Over the ages, its branches had been coaxed and guided upward, woven and shaped with a gentle touch. From that careful sculpting, a beautiful, intricate tower had formed. Inside, a spiralling, living staircase climbed its interior, opening into platforms and alcoves and small carved rooms. At the crown of this ancient tree, wrapped in living wood and generations of caretaking, burned a lantern. This lantern had burned long before anyone living could remember. Its flame was steady and golden, warm yet brighter than anything its size should be. It was a soothing contrast in a world dimmed by the veil. It was said that the lantern held a fragment of the first breath, a leftover sigh from the moment the veil fell. No one knew if that was true, but what they did know is the lantern watched, listened, and listening things usually carried stories older than themselves. Each morning and again at dusk, Imelda climbed the spiral stairs within the great tree to tend the lantern. Her joints were stiff, but her patience was long, very long. Her palms brushed the living bark for balance with each step. She carried a clay jug filled with fresh oil, a resin pressed from a special tree only found near Mournlight. The oil was a green, pale when raw, but once boiled with forest herbs and filtered through fine bark cloth, it shimmered faintly, like honey flecked with moonlight. The lantern drank the oil like a fine wine. It did not need its fire tended, for its flame never went out. But the oil was its nourishment, the way water nourished a river. Imelda reached the top of the stairs just as the veil's morning dim shifted toward the dull silver of near day. She opened the lantern chamber door, and the flame brightened in greeting, not with excitement, but with the warm familiarity of an elder seeing someone they love return. "Good morning," she murmured with a soft smile. The flame deepened in colour, gold pooling rich as sap. A shadow elongated on the far wall, stretching in her direction, a subtle tilt of the lantern's attention. Imelda smiled again. "I brought fresh oil, sweetened with bird leaf again. You liked that yesterday." She poured the oil slowly. The flame trembled happily. It did not speak, but it did not need to. Imelda had been its keeper through countless dawns, so she understood its wordless language the way one understands the breath of a lifelong friend. She was turning to leave when it happened. The lantern flickered, just once, but the flicker was blue. The blue then sank into the flame's core and then steadied, pulsing gently. There was no fear in it, no disruption, only announcement. A quiet clarity meant only for her. Imelda's breath caught. She sat without meaning to, one hand pressed lightly to her ribs. "The moment has come," she whispered. The lantern's shadow stretched further toward her, a slow, elegant shape that brushed her boots before settling again. It was calm, patient, as if saying, "Prepare her." Imelda swallowed against the sudden dryness in her throat. She was a death guide by lineage and instinct, descended from umbral bloodlines that lived close to the veil. She had spent a lifetime easing others through their threshold. She knew death in all its softness, but knowledge did not soften the tremble in her hands. "No matter how many goodbyes we witness," she murmured, Our own is always a little frightening. The lantern glowed in a slow, understanding pulse. Imelda squeezed its frame gently, then descended the spiral stairs with deliberate care. At the base of the great tree, nestled among its roots, stood the small house that had been hers since the lantern had chosen her. The aroma of dried herbs mingled with wood and earth, clinging to its walls and creating a steady warmth. She lit the hearth, swept the floor, and laid fresh linens on the narrow guest bed. She warmed water for tea and set out her last jar of sweet root biscuits. She did all this quietly, methodically, because that was how she kept her heartbeat from stumbling. She knew what the next days would hold, and she knew someone would soon walk through Mournlight's fog, seeking a light they did not understand. Across forests and hills, far from the vale's thickest fold, Lyra dreamed of fog. A single point of light glowed in the distance, pulsing slow and steady. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She stepped toward it, through a corridor of endless silver. The light grew warmer as she approached until it filled her chest and whispered, not in sound but in a knowing older than words, "Come." Lyra jolted awake. Her breath came harsh, her bones vibrating with the echo of the dream. The last ember of her little campfire flickered faintly outside her makeshift shelter. Dawn had not yet risen. Her travelling companions slept around their fire ring, their shelters painted with curling patterns and dangling bells. She had lived among these travelling folk for a long while, never quite belonging, and although welcomed, they watched with a quiet wariness. Banshees often live that way, misunderstood. She rubbed her arms, trying to shake the dream's urgency from her skin, but a pull remained, a tug behind her chest, as if an invisible hand had slipped through the world and caught hold of her. "Mournlight," she said aloud. She had never been there, but the name suddenly felt like a distant home calling. Her mouth went dry. Mournlight was whispered and known throughout Nysera as a town swallowed by the veil, a place where fog smothered sound itself. A place outsiders should never go, for those unfamiliar would surely experience veil sickness. A place where a banshee should never go, for they felt the veil too loudly. Yet she could not unfeel the summons. Lyra packed quietly, a shawl, a knife, a pouch of herbs for the ringing in her ears. She hesitated before leaving her companions in silence. Should she leave a note? What words could she leave behind? She settled on a simple scrawl, "I've been cold." She weighted the note down with a river stone next to her little camp, and then slipped into the pre-dawn dark. The road to Mournlight narrowed step by step, breath by breath. Fog met her early, rising from the undergrowth. Its heaviness pressed against her lungs, each pull of air scraping her ribs. Half-thought voices brushed her ears, the distant echoes of spirits caught in the veil's fold. But still she walked through the day, and then through the night, pulled. Morning was slow as the veil thickened impossibly, clinging to her like wet wool. The distant spirit voices tangled at the edges of her hearing, too many, too close, each one brushing her senses like cold fingertips, her skull wrung with the pressure of it. This was worse than she'd expected. Banshees felt sorrow, felt endings, but the veil held all sorrows at once. Its destiny made her vision blur, and by the time the town gate appeared, she was gasping between breaths. The gatekeeper stared. Banshees were a rare sight in Mournlight. "What brings you?" he finally asked. Lyra clutched her shawl tighter to her body. Her voice came out thin. "Something called me." He swallowed and pointed down a path, thick with fog. "Then go to the lantern keeper. Her house is at the lantern tree's base." Lyra stepped onto the smothering path and toward the ancient tree tower. Her breath faltered, her fears gathering like shadows behind her chest. Faces peered from the fog-wrapped windows, whispers weaved behind shutters. A banshee? Here? Why now? Her heartbeat hammered as she approached the lantern keeper's tower. She raised her tired hand and knocked on the root-carved door. It opened almost immediately. Imelda's face, lined and warm, broke into a smile that felt like sunshine. "You took your time," she said. Lyra blinked, her throat tightening with relief and confusion all at once. I think I'm meant to be here," she managed. "But I don't understand why." Imelda stepped aside. "You will, child." Imelda rested a gentle hand on her arm, a quiet guide through the thick fog. They climbed the living stairs together, Lyra struggling but following Imelda's steady pace. The tree creaked warmly around them, as if recognizing the lantern keeper's touch. The air grew warmer and lighter the higher they climbed. At the top, Imelda pushed open the lantern chamber door. Lyra stopped breathing entirely. The lantern was beyond beautiful, not ornamental, not grand, but alive. Its flame burned gold, deep and serene. The air around it shimmered gently. The trees' wood seemed to lean toward it, as though the lantern anchored the entire structure. The moment she crossed the threshold, the heaviness in her chest loosened. Not completely, but enough that she gasped in quiet relief. The lantern's presence thinned the veil here, creating a pocket of gentle air. The spirit murmurs softened, fading to a distant hum instead of crushing chorus. Lyra clung to the sudden calm like a lifeline. As she stepped closer, the flame brightened. Not drastically, it simply deepened. The shadows shifted, almost danced. One stretched toward her feet, long and curious, like a creature inclining its head. Lyra's breath shuddered. "Is it looking at me?" "It recognizes you," Imelda said softly. Lyra pressed a hand over her racing heart. "But why?" "Because it chose you." Lyra's voice cracked on a laugh. "I'm a banshee. Most avoid me. Children hide from me. I've never belonged anywhere. And you're saying a lantern, this ancient thing, chose me?" "Yes," Imelda replied simply. Lyra stared. The lantern's flame flickered gently, as if amused by her disbelief. Imelda rested a hand on her shoulder. "Come, let me show you how to tend it." Outside the lantern chamber, the veil pressed on her relentlessly. Even so, the next days unfolded like softened light. Imelda began by taking Lyra into the forest where the lessons on oil-making began. While gathering the resin from pale vine trees, Lyra often had to pause, hand braced against a tree, lungs trembling. They scraped sap into wooden bowls, they boiled it with herbs that smelled sharp and green, and then strained it through bark cloth. Although a struggle, Lyra worked in silence as Imelda spoke of the lantern, its purpose, its vigil, and the way its light kept the veil from swallowing the town whole. Her hands grew sticky and fragrant, her sleeves stained with sap, but the work was somehow grounding, calming even. One afternoon Lyra paused. The spirit voices surged louder, thin, wandering notes drifting through the fog. Not malicious, just lost. Their nearness made her bones vibrate, her muscles tighten. Lyra winced at the brush of them. "How do you all bear this?" she whispered. Imelda only smiled gently. "We grew up in it. The veil is loud to newcomers, loudest of all to those who can hear its echoes. But in time, the pressure does ease." Lyra swallowed hard. "Will it ever feel normal?" "Not normal," Imelda said, "but familiar, like a river's roar that becomes part of the landscape. One day you'll notice you can breathe again without fighting for it." The lessons continued. As Imelda shared her knowledge about the oil, about the lantern, about the town, Lyra watched as she handled the oil with an ancient touch, a touch that held no hesitation. "Don't think of it as fuel," Imelda said. "Think of it as food. The lantern knows the hands that prepare it." When Lyra asked how much to boil or strain, Imelda only shrugged. "Your hands will learn. Mine did." Only after Lyra could prepare the oil with confidence did Imelda teach her the lantern's language. "When it sighs like this," she said, as the flame dipped and rose in a slow, smooth arc, "it's remembering. When its shadow sharpens, it wants you near. When it dims, it is listening. And when it glows warm, truly warm, it is telling you that it feels understood." Lyra watched the flame, overwhelmed. "How do you know all this?" Imelda smiled. "Because it spoke to me. But know this." She took Lyra's hand, placing it over her heart. "It may not speak to you the same way. Lanterns learn their keepers. Your intuition is part of its language. Trust it." Lyra nodded slowly. She wanted to believe, but doubt curled deep within her, stubborn as root. What if she misread a flicker? What if she let the lantern dim? What if she failed this entire town because she was too frightened, too clumsy, too strange? She voiced none of this, though, yet the lantern heard anyway. One night, as they tended the lantern together, a strange stillness slipped into the chamber. Lyra stopped as something in her bones went cold. The veil's usual murmur fell silent. In its place came a heavy, waiting hush that pressed against her chest. Her breath hitched. She knew this feeling. Every Banshee did. It wasn't panic, it was certainty. A thin, involuntary wail rose in her throat, a true death call, sharp with sorrow and warning. She tried to swallow it, but it still spilled into the room, clear and bright and unmistakable. The sound rang along the living wood, down through the tree, and out into Mournlight's fog-wrapped streets. Houses stirred, whispers gathered in the darkness, a question on everyone's lips. Whose death does it speak of? Lyra clasped her hand over her mouth, horrified. Why did it have to happen here, of all places? "I didn't mean to," she gasped, "but someone is going to die." But the lantern did not recoil. Its flame warmed, deepened, shadows leaned toward her, holding her worry like cupped hands. The gold swelled around the wick, a slow, steady reassurance. Imelda watched her with sad, knowing eyes. "It knows, child," she murmured. "He was born from sorrow. It has seen more death than we have years. Your cry does not frighten it." Something inside Lyra loosened, in a soft, breathless way. The lantern did not flinch from her true voice. It accepted her. For the first time in years, she did not feel monstrous. The day arrived quietly, like any other, and yet beneath the ordinary sounds, the creak of branches, the soft click of cups, Lyra felt the tension in the air, a faint echo of her own cry still humming in her bones. Someone would die. The knowledge sat in her like a stone. She watched every face in the market, every passer-by, wondering if it was them. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the light outside had sank back toward fog dim, that Imelda set her cup down with a small, decisive sound. "It is time," she said. Lyra's breath caught. "Whose time?" Imelda's smile was gentle and unafraid. "Mine, child. Help me up the stairs." Lyra's throat closed. "No, no, it can't be. My cry, it was about you?" "About an ending," Imelda said, and her eyes were kind. "And yes, mine is the one that answered." She reached out a hand. "Come, I won't make the last climb alone." They climbed the living stairs together, slowly. Imelda leaned into the tree's inner curve, one hand on the bark, the other gripping Lyra's arm. The wood seemed to lend her strength with every step. Lyra's heart hammered, tears blurred her sight, but she did not falter. At the top, the lantern's frame was already changing. A vein of blue shone at its core, spreading outward like dawn through clear water. The shadows in the chambers gathered close, as though the whole room were holding its breath. Imelda sank down with a small sigh, settling with her back against the lantern tree's inner trunk. Lyra knelt beside her, taking her hands. They were cool but steady. I don't want you to go, Lyra choked out. I'm not ready. No one ever is, Imelda brushed a curl from Lyra's cheek. But the lantern is ready for you, and that is enough. Listen to it. It will guide you, as it has guided me. Lyra watched as Imelda drew in one last trembling breath, a breath that would never return. The light slipped from her eyes as they closed, her hands releasing their soft hold on Lyra's. Lyra felt her tears beginning to fall freely, and in that moment of grief she sat beside her new friend and held her lifeless form as she wept. The lantern flickered, its shadows gliding over the keeper it was losing and the keeper it had chosen. Then, in a quiet act of recognition, it flared. Light poured from it, not in a harsh burst, but in a rising, unstoppable tide. Gold went to white gold, then nearly to white, bright enough that Lyra had to squeeze her eyes shut and turn away. The whole chamber filled with radiance. The air hummed with it. Outside, Mournlight's fog lit up. Fae stepped from their doorsteps, blinking against the brilliance. The great lantern tree shone like a second sun caught in the heart of the town. Faces turned up, awed and aching. The keeper, someone whispered. The lantern is taking her home. Children stood in the streets, mouths open, bathed in light they had never seen so strongly. For a moment the veil itself seemed thinner, its grip loosened by the sheer gentleness of that glow. Inside the chamber, Lyra felt the body in her arms grow lighter, not colder. The light pressed against her closed lids, warm and insistent. She felt, rather than saw, the moment something unclasped, like a breath released after a lifetime of holding. Then, slowly, the radiance ebbed. When Lyra opened her eyes, spots danced in her vision. The lantern had settled back to its gold, its flame steady and calm, a faint thread of blue still nestled in its heart. Imelda's hands were no longer in hers. Lyra looked down. The place where Imelda had sat was empty, save for the soft impression of her weight in the wood, already fading. No body remained. Lyra pressed her palm to the warm bark and bowed her head, weeping softly. The lantern's shadow brushed her shoulder, steady as a hand. Morning found her hollow-eyed in Imelda's small root house. She stared at the cold hearth. She could leave. She could run. She had always run. But the pull in her chest remained. So she climbed the stairs again. She opened the now familiar chamber door, and the lantern brightened as she entered. Its shadows reached across the floor, greeting her gently. Its soft glow thinned the veil, easing the pressure in her lungs. For the first time since arriving in Mournlight, she breathed without flinching. Lyra's throat tightened. I do not know if I can do this, she whispered. But I'm here. She refilled the oil reservoir with trembling hands. The flame steadied. She sat beside it, legs folded under her, and let a soft hum escape her, low, wavering, a banshee's voice reshaped into comfort. The lantern listened. It glowed warm. Outside, the veil shifted, just a little. The fog drew back from the nearest houses, giving the town a longer breath. Lyra leaned her head against the ancient trees in a bark. The lantern's shadow rested against hers, steady and kind, and in that moment Mournlight exhaled. A deep, relieved sigh that drifted through its streets, settling into the roots and windows. The lantern watched. Lyra stayed, and together they kept the town breathing.